Imagine a world where an item in a game that costs 50 million coins is outclassed by one that costs 7. Or an armor piece that costs 4 million coins is worse than a piece not even worth a million. Welcome to Hypixel Skyblock, where power creep is shown at its worst. Or at the very least, it's a good example of it. Now that's a pretty big claim, but by the end of this video, I think you might agree, or at least understand where I'm coming from. Trust me, from dragons to slayers, and especially dungeons, the evidence is nothing less than concrete. But before we get too far into shaming the game, let's talk a bit about power creep as a concept. So, what is power creep? I've already said those words 4 times so far, but what do they even mean? Power creep is defined as the gradual unbalancing of a game due to constant releases of new, stronger, or better content. Still a bit confusing? I don't blame you. Let me give you a quick example. This is a full set of dragon armor, which was, at one point, widely considered one of the best armor sets to own in the game. To obtain a set like this, you'd have to spend hours slaying these endermen in the most dangerous biome to obtain 8 summoning eyes, which you would then use those eyes to summon a mighty dragon and try your hardest to get in as much damage on that flying lizard as possible, all for just a chance of dropping just one singular piece of the dragon armor. It was either this, or you had to spend countless hours making coins to buy the gear yourself. Needless to say, if you owned a set of dragon armor, you were immediately categorized as a highly experienced player. And this is the Shadow Assassin armor set, and it drops pretty commonly from a floor 5 dungeon, which anyone could be carried through, by the way. Okay, so what's the problem here? We've got 2 different armor sets. Why are they being compared? Well, the Shadow Assassin armor is undoubtedly easier to obtain, and way cheaper than the dragon armor. And on top of that, the Shadow Assassin armor is stronger in almost every way. That's right, the armor set that's easier to get turns out to be the better option of the 2. Of course, if these 2 armor sets were released at the same time, I'm sure they'd be rebalanced immediately, but the Shadow Assassin armor was released over a year after the dragon armor was. This is power creep, where new content often renders older content obsolete. It makes sense though. I mean, think about it. If new content is underpowered or useless, it's not going to get used, and there's no reason to play the new update. I think that's what entices Skyblock's developers to make all the newer items stronger and more useful than most or all of the previous content. Knowing that makes it kinda hard to blame them for this whole thing. I'm no admin after all, I'm just a guy with an opinion. One last thing before we hop into the specific examples of power creep. I've decided to make this video because I've noticed that there hasn't been one made on this topic for at least a couple of years, and I thought I may as well be the one to give a more up-to-date take on this subject. And it's okay if you disagree with some of the examples I give. Feel free to discuss them in the comment section. Again, all just opinions. Capiche? Okay, good. The first thing I want to talk about is the gear that you can get from dungeons. Oh my god, the gear you can get from dungeons. How do I say this? From the very start of your profile, all the way to the absolute endgame, you'll be pretty dang reliant on your gear from dungeons. Start yourself off with the Dreadlord sword, or a zombie soldier cutlass, make your way up to Shadow Assassin gear with a livid dagger, next thing you know you're holding a Hyperion. Wait, what? Isn't a Hyperion one of the best weapons in the game? Yes. Yes, it is. You can even ignore all other points of progression besides dungeons, and you could still have your hands on one way earlier than you probably should. Jokes aside, there is quite a lot of progression skipping you can do with dungeons. Let's take the Dreadlord sword for example. While a very early game weapon, there is no reason for it to be as strong as it is outside of dungeons. Completely new players can defeat some of the highest tiers of Slayer bosses with this sword alone. Add in the dark goggles, and it's over for any early game enemy. Moving forward a little bit, there's the Shadow Assassin armor. That's right, I'm already talking about this armor set again. For how early on players have access to this set, it's really dang strong. Nothing too game breaking, but it's easily better than any other physical damage set until Necron armor. Speaking of Shadow Assassin armor, let's talk about the Livid Dagger. Really, is there an item that gets players more hate than this one? Compared to the other early game swords, such as the Aspect of the Dragons or the Void Sword, the Livid Dagger outclasses them in every way. It always deals a critical hit, massive boost to attack speed, and doubles damage when behind a target. It's just an incredible weapon overall. But it's really left every other option in the dust. Nobody ever uses an Aspect of the Dragons anymore because the Livid Dagger is just too good. And of course, the Livid Dagger was released well after the Aspect of the Dragons. But in my opinion, the worst thing about getting Dungeons gear early on is that you can be easily carried through every floor. Oh, hello? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. I've been advised to stop talking is to not come across as a hypocrite. Okay, I'm sure you get my point. Dungeon's too OP. Let's move on to something that's quite the opposite. Stuff we call useless. Garbage, even. Slayer items. No, not items like the Warden Helmet, Overflux, or Terminator. Those are some of the good ones. I'm talking about items like the Reaper Armor, the Scorpion Foil, the Armor of the Pack, and in some cases, even the respective weapons for Zombie and Enderman Slayer. But Logan, these items were made to help players progress in the Slayer. How could they be useless? I honestly have no idea why most of these items are dog piss useless. Maybe the developers made them this way on purpose as some sort of elaborate prank. By the time you unlock any of these items, you're practically guaranteed to have some sort of better gear on hand that would serve you much better than any of these Slayer items ever could. And that's all thanks to dungeons. There's a lot to go over regarding useless Slayer items, so I'll sum it up real quick. Most of the Wolf and Spider Slayer gear never has a use at all. All lower tier Zombie Slayer gear is useless, and the Enderman Slayer weapons are outclassed by, you guessed it, dungeon items. That's what I like about Blaze Slayer. It pretty much forces you to use the weapons that were meant for it. I say, never having done a single Blaze Slayer boss fight. Never mind that, let's just move on. It's about halfway through the video, you know what that means. If you're enjoying this, for lack of a better term, rant so far, please consider leaving a like on the video or even subscribing. It helps me a ton as a small creator, and I really do appreciate anything that you'd be willing to do. Discord will be public soon, so keep a watch out for that. Alright, that's enough. Let's keep going. Another big part of the game that's been suffering from power creep for a long while is dragons. Oh, do you remember when dragons actually took time and effort to take down? I don't, it's just been too long. When the End Island was first released, everyone was in their Ender Armor and Hurricane bows, if you were lucky, Dragon Armor and Runon's bows, firing arrows at every dragon they saw. And that was about it. Everyone would hope and pray for a superior dragon and have the opportunity to flex their sweet golden armor on others. Those days are long gone, and boy is its history a story and a half. First, players discovered that they can do more damage to dragons if they hit it with their swords rather than their bows. So that was the dragon meta for a while, until the last tier of Zombie Slayer came out, which introduced an item called the Axe of the Shredded. It's hard to explain what exactly this item did to dragons, but it has to be considered a capital offense. The dragon could have 10 million health, but players could deal up to hundreds of millions of damage to it just with this funny little axe. Wild times, really. I believe it was called ghost damage or something. Spooky. Somewhere down the line, the admins realized that these dragons were going down way too fast, and they essentially limited the amount of damage that players could deal to them. So what was the solution that the community came up with? Well, let's just shoot more arrows, and that they did. With the addition of the Terminator from Enderman Slayer and the Terror Armor from the Crimson Isles, the damage limit had nothing on them. Shooting dozens of arrows per second, the dragons are falling at a record pace. Now, you may be wondering how newer players who don't have access to things like Terminators or Terror Armor can deal good damage to dragons, and I've got a simple answer for that. They don't. If someone in their lobby can shoot 90 arrows per second, nobody else gets to do any real damage. But above all, I think the clearest example of power creep is the downfall of the Midas Sword. This item will always be a staple of the game. For those who don't know, the Midas Sword was at one point the strongest weapon in the game, and it held that title for a good while actually. Of course, over time, new and better items were released, and eventually it was dethroned when Floor 5 of Dungeons was released. The Midas Sword even received a special reforge, just like the Midas Gear, and yet it still wasn't good enough. And the worst part is, the Midas Sword is often more expensive than a lot of the stronger gear. Again, it's fair enough, it was bound to happen eventually, it just doesn't make sense to me why this legacy item remains so expensive nowadays. Or, on the contrary, why those other items are so cheap in comparison. The last big example I can think of was the introduction of God Potions. On second thought, maybe I'll skip this one. I'm sure you knew where I was going with this one anyways. I just miss the vibes of group and guild splashes. That being said, it's all about progression skipping, and I think it's a shame that we all missed out on a good amount of content and gear because other options were cheaper and better. I think that the developers were more on the right track with Enderman Slayer and Blaze Slayer, but the first three remain unchanged. Okay, how about instead of complaining, we figure out a possible solution? That's the thing, I don't know a definitive solution to keep Skyblock's power creep at bay. If you have any ideas, leave a comment down below. Not everyone is going to agree with a solution as simple as, don't let players use dungeon items outside of dungeons, so let's get a conversation going. Or is this even a problem at all? Are people like me making a big fuss for nothing? It's up to you. Again, let me know what you think. I don't really care either way, you've already given me all the watch time I want. Thank you, by the way, that was a joke, I appreciate you. But that's gonna be about all for today. I know this one was very different from the usual, more of a rant or a commentary type video. Let's see if I get canceled for my Skyblock opinions. Hopefully not, I'll catch you later. Until next time.